January 1942. The sun rises weakly over the frost-hardened fields of northern France. A thin mist clings to the low hills, curling around the wooden fences that separate the farmland. In the distance, the low growl of engines breaks the stillness. German trucks, moving steadily along a narrow dirt road, their tires crunching over frozen mud. Soldiers sit rigidly in the cabins, rifles at their sides, eyes scanning the countryside for signs of resistance. Nearby, a small farm awakens to the morning. Smoke rises from the chimney of a stone cottage. A farmer, coat heavy with frost, pushes open the door to tend to his livestock. One cow, large and stubborn, ambles lazily out of the barnyard, sniffing at the road. The ground shakes faintly as the convoy draws closer. The farmer glances nervously at the approaching vehicles, heart tightening, not yet aware that a single, wandering animal is about to halt the march of men, machines, and the meticulous machinery of occupation. Time slows. Engine growls, hoofbeats, and human tension merge into a moment that will be remembered, small but striking, in the long ledger of war. Northern France, early 1942. The German occupation of the region had been established for nearly 2 years, and yet the countryside retained a quiet defiance. Rolling fields and small villages stretched across the landscape, punctuated by narrow dirt roads that connected farms to market towns. These roads, simple and unassuming, became arteries of a vast military machine, channels through which the Wehrmacht moved men, weapons, and supplies. For the German command, maintaining uninterrupted logistical flow was critical. Fuel, ammunition, and food had to reach frontline units in the east and strategic garrisons across occupied territories. Even minor delays could ripple across hundreds of kilometers, disrupting operations in ways that could not always be predicted. Convoys were the backbone of these movements. They were organized with military precision. Trucks, light armored vehicles, motorcycles, and occasionally heavy artillery mounted on trailers. Each convoy moved at a calculated pace, balancing speed with caution. Soldiers in the lead vehicles scouted for threats, while those at the rear ensured nothing fell behind. Roadblocks, both civilian and military, had to be anticipated. Farmers plowing fields, wandering animals, and narrow bridges were all recognized as potential hazards. But often, no preparation could prevent the unpredictable. The rural population lived under constant scrutiny. Farmers were expected to keep their livestock, fields, and homes in order, yet the occupation created a persistent tension. Any unexpected movement on a road could draw suspicion. German patrols, particularly along supply routes, enforced strict regulations. Civilians learned quickly that minor actions, allowing an animal to wander too close, leaving a gate unlatched, could provoke sharp reprimands or fines. Yet, for many, the rhythms of farm life persisted. The plow turned the soil, hens clucked, and cows grazed, largely unaware of the global conflict threading through their meadows. These convoys were not mere deliveries. They were carefully orchestrated operations. Each movement had to account for terrain, potential ambushes, and the limits of the vehicles themselves. Roads were often narrow, bordered by hedgerows or shallow ditches. Mud in winter, dust in summer, and icy ruts in early spring challenged even the most disciplined drivers. Trucks with heavy loads required spacing to prevent collisions, while soldiers remained vigilant for sabotage. German engineers occasionally reinforced bridges or widened bends, but the countryside could not be fully tamed. The natural world, trees, animals, weather, was a persistent factor. A fallen branch, a herd of geese, or, as would soon occur, a single cow could disrupt the precision of the military clockwork. The strategic importance of these rural convoys became even more apparent when considering the broader war effort. In early 1942, the Wehrmacht was heavily engaged on multiple fronts. Supplies had to flow to the Eastern Front, while occupying forces in France and the Low Countries maintained roads, depots, and garrisons. Each convoy was a link in a chain. Any delay, no matter how trivial, could leave frontline units underfed, underarmed, or unprepared for sudden Soviet offensives. German commanders relied on meticulous timetables and disciplined logistics officers. Yet, the human and natural elements of rural life remained unpredictable, a subtle but persistent threat to efficiency. Among civilians, stories of small disruptions spread quickly. A cart breaking an axle, a cow wandering into the road, a bridge iced over. Each incident, though minor in scale, was magnified in consequence by the military dependence on punctuality and order. Farmers often watched convoys pass, acutely aware that the hum of engines carried both danger and authority. The men in uniform were not invincible. They were human, bound by procedures and subject to delays caused by forces beyond their control. These tensions between the occupiers' military precision and the countryside's chaotic rhythms set the stage for seemingly trivial events to gain disproportionate significance. It was against this backdrop, a landscape of frost-covered fields, narrow lanes, and disciplined yet vulnerable convoys, that a single cow would emerge as an unlikely agent of disruption. The German supply trucks, moving steadily and predictably along their route, were about to confront a challenge neither map nor schedule could anticipate. The ordinary life of the farm, unremarkable and routine, collided with the extraordinary machinery of war in a way that highlighted both the vulnerabilities of occupation and the unpredictability of daily life under conflict. This moment, small yet symbolic, would reveal the fragility of even the most disciplined operations and underscore how ordinary civilians and their animals could influence the movements of a modern army. It was a reminder that war, for all its plans and strategies, remains subject to chance, nature, and human, and sometimes animal, agency. The stage was set. The misted fields, the narrow dirt roads, the humming engines of the German convoy, and a wandering cow were converging toward a moment that would pause the machinery of war, if only briefly. The convoy that morning was typical of German supply movements in occupied France. Yet every detail mattered. A string of 5 trucks carried essential supplies, ammunition, rations, and spare vehicle parts destined for garrisons along the northern front. Lightly armored personnel carriers and motorcycles flanked the trucks, providing reconnaissance and security. At the front, a command vehicle bore the convoy officer, responsible for navigation, timing, and communication with units farther along the route. The convoy's pace was measured, calculated to balance speed with caution, particularly over rural roads prone to hazards. The terrain itself presented constant challenges. Narrow lanes, bordered by hedgerows and ditches, offered little room for maneuver. Fields stretched away from the road, dotted with farmhouses and barns. Frosted mud threatened traction, while shallow ruts could destabilize a heavily laden truck. Bridges were often too narrow to accommodate two-way traffic. Every turn demanded attention, as a miscalculation could result in vehicles colliding, overturning, or becoming stuck. For soldiers accustomed to efficiency, these roads were a reminder that even routine movement carried risk. Beyond the physical environment, human factors shaped convoy operations. Drivers required precise timing and coordination. Each truck depended on the one in front to maintain speed and direction. Soldiers were trained to respond quickly to obstacles, yet unfamiliar roads and civilian activity introduced unpredictability. Farmers were often visible from the road's edge, tending animals or carrying out daily tasks. The presence of civilians complicated military movements. Any sudden motion could be mistaken for resistance or sabotage, heightening tension. Convoy officers also had to anticipate potential partisan attacks. Though northern France was relatively quiet compared to Eastern Front combat zones, the possibility of ambushes was ever present. Reports from previous months warned of minor disruptions, fallen trees, hidden spikes, and improvised barricades. Even a brief halt could expose trucks and personnel to enemy action. These risks required constant vigilance, careful spacing, and readiness to adapt, a challenge amplified by the inherent limitations of the vehicles themselves. Each vehicle had mechanical constraints. Trucks overloaded with supplies struggled on inclines, their engines laboring under weight and cold. Tires were prone to punctures from stones or debris, and brakes could fail on icy descents. The command officer maintained communication with the rear, but radio range was limited. Drivers relied on visual cues and experience, making the convoy as vulnerable as any single misstep along its path. Even minor interference, a fallen branch or a wandering animal, could force sudden braking, potentially triggering collisions or delays. The convoy's movement was a careful choreography. Trucks spaced to allow braking, soldiers on alert, weapons ready. Yet the Germans' expectation of routine clashed with the unpredictability of rural life. Civilians continued their work, animals roamed the fields, and the countryside remained stubbornly indifferent to military timetables. Such conditions created the perfect environment for a seemingly minor event to have disproportionate effects. This context of strict order versus everyday unpredictability highlights the delicate balance between control and chaos in occupied territories. German supply operations, while meticulously planned, were never immune to disruption. Farmers, often considered passive observers, were themselves agents within this environment. Their animals, routines, and presence could inadvertently affect military movements. The roads, seemingly ordinary, were scenes of tension, where mechanical precision met the realities of natural and human unpredictability. The narrow dirt lane along which the convoy traveled that morning became the stage for such a collision of worlds. The soldiers were alert but unprepared for an entirely mundane, yet consequential intruder. For the convoy, every moment counted, every pause a potential risk. For the countryside, life went on, indifferent to the calculations of men and machines. And then, in the quiet frost of the morning, an ordinary cow would step onto the road, a living, breathing agent of disruption. The animals of the farm, the rhythm of rural life, and the rigidly structured military operation were about to collide. In that moment, the machinery of occupation would meet the unpredictable, organic world in a single, unforgettable pause. The tension was set. The convoy approached, the road narrowed, the cow advanced. Every prepared measure, every calculation of the German command was about to confront the impossible to plan for, chance itself. The farmer, a man accustomed to the quiet rhythm of his land, could not have anticipated the drama his livestock would cause. To him, the cow was merely doing what cows do, wandering, grazing, testing the edges of the familiar barnyard. Yet in that moment, the ordinary became extraordinary. Soldiers, trucks, and the machinery of war converged on the narrow lane, and a single, wandering cow became the pivot between two worlds. The slow, persistent pulse of rural life and the regimented precision of an occupying army. For the farmer, fear mingled with helpless amusement. Any misstep could provoke the ire of armed soldiers, yet the absurdity of the moment lent a surreal tension. Civilians nearby paused to watch, their hearts quickened by a small disruption that revealed the fragility of German control. What might otherwise have been an unnoticed morning chore transformed into an event where human presence, through observation, reaction, and a touch of panic, played a decisive role. From a military standpoint, the convoy's formation and tactics were designed for efficiency and security. Trucks followed at precise intervals, flanked by reconnaissance motorcycles and light armored vehicles to scout the road ahead. The narrow country lane offered little room for deviation. When the cow appeared, the The soldiers' reaction was immediate but constrained. Braking abruptly risked a pileup. Swerving could damage vehicles or overturn the heavily loaded trucks. For officers, the presence of a civilian animal introduced a sudden, uncontrollable variable into the carefully managed flow of men and machines. Tactical doctrine emphasized control of the road and readiness for ambush, yet no training accounted for the unlikely obstacle of livestock. The pause caused by the cow, though brief, created a moment of vulnerability. Trucks stalled, engines idling, soldiers on edge, eyes scanning the hedgerows for potential threats. In that pause, the tension of logistics and the unpredictability of life intersected. The technology of the German convoy, while advanced for the time, had its limitations. Trucks relied on mechanical braking systems, engines prone to overheat under heavy loads, and tires ill-suited for icy or uneven terrain. Communication was largely visual or via limited-range radios, meaning that sudden disruptions could ripple along the convoy before commands were effectively transmitted. In this context, a wandering cow was more than an inconvenience. It was a test of mechanical resilience and coordination. The convoy's drivers had to adjust instantly to maintain stability, preventing collisions while keeping engines running and loads intact. The vehicles themselves, designed for transport under battlefield conditions, revealed their vulnerability to the small, everyday challenges of rural life. The incident demonstrated how even modern machinery depended on the unexpected compliance of the natural world. For the soldiers, the encounter carried an unusual psychological weight. Occupation often involved monotony, control, and the suppression of human error. Yet in this moment, a single animal reminded them of their own limitations and the absurdities inherent in war. Laughter, frustration, and anxiety blended together as men grappled with an obstacle that required no strategy or combat skill. The moral implications were subtle but present. The futility of absolute control, the limits of authority, and the realization that even disciplined forces could be humbled by chance. For civilians, witnessing the incident reinforced a quiet sense of agency. The convoy's pause, the soldiers' scramble, and the minor chaos it caused became a story of subtle resistance, a reminder that even the smallest acts, or animals, could disrupt the machinery of war. From the perspective of the convoy commander, the incident with the cow was a test of adaptability under unexpected circumstances. German officers relied on discipline, training, and pre-planned routes to maintain order, yet the unpredictable elements of rural life challenged even the most meticulous planning. The officer at the front vehicle had to make rapid decisions: slow the convoy, signal to following trucks, or attempt to guide the animal away. Communication with the rear trucks was limited, relying on hand signals, horns, or shouted commands over the rumble of engines. Leadership, in this moment, was measured not in strategy or firepower, but in the ability to respond calmly and effectively to an unforeseen disruption. Small choices, a quick stop, a slight maneuver, or the decision to wait, dictated whether the convoy could resume its journey without accidents or delays. In essence, leadership became a balance between authority and improvisation, highlighting how even minor events required decisive command. Enemy/security angle. For the German soldiers, the countryside was never entirely safe. Partisan activity, though sporadic in northern France, was a constant concern. Every pause, no matter how brief, carried the risk of ambush or sabotage. When the cow halted the convoy, the soldiers' attention was split, one eye on the animal, the other scanning the surrounding hedgerows and tree lines for potential threats. An ordinary roadblock, a cow wandering in the frost-covered lane, was enough to momentarily shift focus from vigilance to reaction. In these frozen moments, the convoy became vulnerable. The unpredictability of life in occupied territory, combined with the ever-present threat of resistance fighters, underscored the fragile nature of military control. What seemed a humorous or minor disruption was, from a security perspective, a reminder that even the most disciplined forces could not fully anticipate the environment in which they operated. From the perspective of villagers observing the scene, the incident was both amusing and empowering. Life under occupation was governed by strict rules and the ever-present authority of armed soldiers. Yet here, in the early frost of the morning, a cow had momentarily brought the machinery of war to a halt. Civilians witnessed the soldiers scramble, their rigid formations broken, their vehicles stalled. The pause was brief, but symbolically significant, a subtle inversion of power, where ordinary life could assert itself over military order. Stories of such incidents spread quickly through nearby farms, reinforcing the awareness that not all authority was absolute, and that even the smallest elements of daily life could influence events in unexpected ways. The incident also reflected the psychological tension inherent in occupied territories. Soldiers, trained for discipline and efficiency, faced the absurdity of responding to a cow rather than a human threat. Civilians, accustomed to fear and caution, experienced a fleeting moment of levity as the absurdity unfolded. For both sides, the pause created by the animal became more than a logistical delay. It was a psychological reminder that the world of war was unpredictable. Humor, frustration, and surprise intertwined, leaving impressions that would outlast the immediate event. In broader cultural terms, such stories persisted in local memory, illustrating how minor, non-combat events could shape perceptions of power, control, and resistance during wartime. Taken together, these perspectives illustrate the multiple dimensions of what might appear at first glance to be a trivial incident. The human and psychological reactions, the tactical and technological challenges, the leadership decisions, and the subtle influence of civilians and animals, all converge to reveal the complex interplay between military order and the unpredictability of everyday life. The incident serves as a microcosm of wartime reality. Even meticulously planned operations remain vulnerable to small, unforeseen factors. The tension of anticipation remains, poised on the brink of action. The cow, the convoy, and the narrow country road are now aligned for the decisive moment that will transform this ordinary morning into a story remembered for its absurdity, impact, and human resonance. The frost-coated road lay silent for a brief heartbeat before disruption erupted. The cow, plodding without urgency, entered the narrow lane just as the convoy approached its bend. The first truck, laden with ammunition and supplies, swerved slightly, tires skidding over frozen mud. The engine growl rose sharply as the driver slammed on the brakes, horns blaring to alert following vehicles. Soldiers, trained for ambush and attack, found themselves facing an entirely unexpected threat. Shouts rang out, commands to steer, stop, or push the animal aside, but the cow remained indifferent, snorting and shifting its weight to block the path. The trucks, moving in precise intervals only moments before, now clustered dangerously close, their engines idling, metal scraping lightly against one another. Each driver assessed the risk, hit the animal and face potential damage and reprisal from the officer, or halt and wait, leaving the convoy momentarily exposed. The commanding officer in the lead vehicle acted quickly. He signaled with raised arms, instructing drivers to brake gradually, a maneuver complicated by icy ruts and frozen mud. The light armored vehicle at the convoy's flank moved forward, attempting to guide the cow back toward the ditch, but it resisted, shifting with stubborn unpredictability. For the soldiers, every second counted. They were aware that the pause, trivial as it seemed, left them vulnerable. The countryside, though quiet, had long been a theater of minor ambushes, and any delay could be catastrophic if partisan fighters were nearby. Time stretched, Engines hummed in tense staccato, tires struggling against frozen soil. The convoy's pace, designed for efficiency, was shattered. Drivers relied on instinct, adjusting wheel positions, modulating brakes, and communicating through shouts over the engine roar. The cow's presence turned ordinary logistics into a delicate test of coordination. Each movement demanded attention. Too fast, and a collision would occur. Too slow, and the convoy risked exposure. Soldiers' reactions varied. Some gestured, urging the animal to move aside. Others hesitated, uncertain whether to proceed or wait for the officer's command. Weapons remained at their sides, not for engagement, but as a reminder of authority. Yet even authority had limits. The cow, oblivious to military hierarchy, dictated the pace. A mundane, living obstacle had wrested control from the hands of seasoned men, halting the flow of war with sheer, unplanned persistence. The convoy's structure began to ripple. The second truck, carrying food rations and spare parts, had to brake suddenly, tires locking and skidding across the lane. Behind it, the third truck followed suit, the abrupt halt creating a momentary cluster of vehicles, metal brushing against metal. The motorcycles at the edges darted to avoid collisions, engines whining in protest. The soldiers' eyes darted to hedgerows and nearby trees, scanning for threats while simultaneously negotiating the challenge immediately ahead. Even the most disciplined driver was tested. The vehicle at the rear, heavy with supplies, struggled to maintain balance on the frozen mud. The driver attempted a careful swerve, but the narrow lane offered no margin for error. The convoy was temporarily immobilized, a rare pause in a world where timing and movement dictated the difference between efficiency and chaos. The officers signaled the armored vehicle forward again, nudging the cow gently with the vehicle's front bumper. The animal, startled, stepped aside, but only slightly, not fully clearing the lane. Every participant understood the stakes. While no shots were fired, no bombs dropped, the pause was fraught with risk. German supply lines, though designed for routine, were vulnerable. A moment's distraction could compromise safety, timing, and security. Here, in the frost of a rural morning, the mundane intersected with the military. The animal's simple act of wandering became a force that momentarily dictated action, strategy, and decision-making. The human element was no less critical. Soldiers' voices, raised in urgency, conveyed frustration and disbelief. Officers' gestures, precise and authoritative, attempted to restore order. The farmer, watching from the edge of the field, witnessed a rare inversion of power. The soldiers, usually symbols of control and authority, were at the mercy of an indifferent creature. For a fleeting moment, the world felt suspended between the routines of occupation and the spontaneous rhythms of life outside the military clockwork. Finally, the cow, with deliberate slowness, exited the lane, guided by the armored vehicle and the combined efforts of several soldiers. The convoy breathed, engines revving back to their steady rhythm, vehicles respaced, and the march resumed. The disruption lasted less than 5 minutes, but the intensity of that interval, the clash between human order, mechanical precision, and living unpredictability, etched itself into memory. This brief, chaotic moment was more than an interruption. It highlighted the fragility of meticulously planned operations, the limitations of leadership and technology, and the subtle power of life continuing amid war. The convoy had halted, recalibrated, and continued, but the story of the morning would linger, a reminder that even the smallest elements could challenge the machinery of war. The stage is now set for the second part of the climax, assessing the immediate operational consequences of the disruption and understanding how a minor interruption rippled through the convoy's mission and a larger wartime environment. With the cow finally out of the lane, the convoy attempted to regain its rhythm, yet the disruption left lingering effects. The first truck's brakes had overstrained, its engine overheating slightly from the repeated stops and starts. The second truck carried minor scratches from the brief clustering, and a tire on the rear vehicle had slipped into a shallow ditch, forcing a pause for extraction. The officers noted each issue with meticulous attention. Minor, almost negligible in isolation, but collectively they represented a temporary breakdown in operational efficiency. The pause had also created a psychological ripple among the soldiers. Training emphasized control, authority, and rapid response to threats, yet none of those principles could fully prepare men for a wandering animal halting a convoy. Some officers suppressed amusement. Others muttered frustrations under breath. The incident, absurd in its simplicity, highlighted the delicate balance between human oversight and the uncontrollable elements of the environment. Even the most disciplined formations could be undone by something as ordinary as livestock. From a tactical perspective, the convoy was briefly vulnerable. The staggered halt, lasting less than 5 minutes, widened gaps between trucks and disrupted the flow of soldiers' attention. In theory, a coordinated partisan ambush could have exploited these moments. While no attack occurred that morning, German military manuals and after-action reports later emphasized the importance of constant vigilance, even during seemingly trivial pauses. The cow, in its indifference, had underscored a critical lesson. The smallest, unanticipated disruptions could expose vulnerabilities. Beyond the immediate convoy, the disruption drew attention from nearby civilians. Villagers watched from hedgerows and farm entrances, their presence unnoticed amid the mechanical and human struggle. In occupied territories, even minor acts, standing at the roadside, observing, or smiling at a halted convoy, carried subtle psychological weight. The soldiers, aware of civilian eyes, felt the dual pressure of maintaining discipline and appearing unflustered. In this sense, the cow had achieved something more than a temporary roadblock. It created a pause in which the power dynamics of occupation were momentarily inverted, if only symbolically. The convoy gradually resumed its forward movement, vehicles once again spaced at calculated intervals, engines revving steadily through the frost-laden morning. Soldiers returned to their preoccupation with the road ahead, scanning hedgerows and ditches for threats. Yet the memory of the interruption lingered. Officers recorded the minor mechanical issues in logs, noting delays in vehicle responses. Reports emphasized that even negligible obstacles demanded attention, and that human factors, the reactions of drivers, soldiers, and civilians, could amplify a simple event into a noteworthy disruption. The cow itself wandered back toward the fields, unconcerned with the chaos it had caused. To the farmer, the animal's return was an ordinary act. Yet to the convoy, the incident became a small but significant lesson in flexibility and caution. A minor distraction, a seemingly inconsequential presence, had briefly wrested control from one of the most disciplined military forces of the era. The juxtaposition of order and unpredictability crystallized in the narrow lane, frozen in the frost of early morning and in the minds of those who witnessed it. In broader operational terms, the convoy had achieved its objective. Supplies continued to move, and no attack occurred. But the incident reinforced the reality that meticulous planning could be disrupted by factors outside human control. Logistics officers, reflecting on similar events across occupied Europe, documented the need for adaptability, clear communication, and constant vigilance. Minor obstacles, whether animals, civilians, or environmental hazards, had the potential to cascade into delays, accidents, or even strategic consequences. The cow's intrusion was a vivid illustration of this principle. The pause also revealed something subtler: the interplay between nature, human activity, and military systems. War, often understood through maps, battles, and strategy, could be influenced by the smallest actors: an animal, a farmer, or a bend in the road. The event, brief yet impactful, offered a snapshot of the unpredictable rhythms of wartime life, where control was always provisional and discipline constantly tested. As the convoy finally disappeared down the frost-covered lane, engines fading into the mist, the countryside returned to its quiet rhythm. Birds called from the hedgerows. The farmer resumed his chores. The vehicles had moved, the soldiers returned to their duties, and yet the story of the morning's interruption would endure, a reminder that even in the precise machinery of war, unpredictability retained its power. This concludes the decisive moment. The convoy's temporary halt, minor mechanical stresses, and human reactions now transition into the aftermath, where the consequences, both operational and symbolic, are explored. By mid-morning, the convoy had resumed its march, the cow left behind in the frost-covered field, indifferent to the disruption it had caused. On paper, the event was minor, a delay of no more than 5 minutes. But even such a brief interruption had measurable consequences for the soldiers and the convoy's operation. The first truck's brakes had suffered minor wear, forcing the driver to proceed with caution. The rear trucks will have been jostled in the ditch, requiring careful realignment. For officers responsible for logs and timing, these small mechanical issues translated into documentation of operational inefficiency, a record of disruption that would feed into later analyses of convoy reliability. The soldiers themselves carried the memory of the morning's incident. Accounts describe a mixture of frustration and reluctant amusement. Some men quietly acknowledged the absurdity of their predicament, while others remained tense, their minds focused on the vulnerabilities momentarily exposed. For a military trained in precision and discipline, the pause highlighted how even the most meticulously organized movements were subject to chance, human error, and the unpredictability of the environment. The incident served as a quiet lesson. Preparation alone could not guarantee absolute control. From a logistical perspective, the convoy had technically accomplished its mission. Supplies reached their destination without loss or enemy interference, and no partisan activity exploited the temporary pause. Yet German military planners recognized that even minor delays could have larger implications. Records from similar operations emphasize that repeated small interruptions, fallen trees, icy patches, or wandering animals, could cascade into critical failures if compounded over longer distances. The cow's intrusion, trivial in isolation, became a case study in operational vulnerability, illustrating how minor obstacles could test the resilience of both personnel and equipment. Local civilians, meanwhile, observed the aftermath with a sense of quiet satisfaction. In occupied territories, small acts of disruption, whether intentional or accidental, offered psychological relief. Villagers watched the convoy's pause and took note of the soldiers' reactions. A cow had stalled the advance of armed vehicles, an event both comical and symbolically significant. It reinforced an awareness that even powerful military forces were not omnipotent, that the rhythms of rural life could intersect with war in unpredictable ways. Stories of the morning spread among nearby farms, entering the oral record of the occupation, a minor yet memorable anecdote of resistance by circumstance. The officers recorded the incident in convoy logs with clinical precision. Mechanical wear, timing delays, and the brief clustering of trucks were noted, a reminder that minor disruptions demanded attention. Engineers and logistics specialists later reviewed similar events, integrating lessons into convoy procedures. Adjustments included increased spacing between vehicles, heightened attention to roadside conditions, and contingency planning for unforeseen obstacles. The cow, though not a deliberate threat, highlighted the need for flexibility and vigilance. Operationally, the incident had exposed a subtle truth. Military precision could never fully account for the living, chaotic elements of the environment. Soldiers were trained to respond to enemy attacks, but nature and civilian life operated according to different rules. Every bend in a rural lane, every frost-covered patch of mud, and every wandering animal introduced potential instability into even the most controlled operations. For the German command, the episode underscored a lesson that would resonate across future convoys. Control was provisional, contingent on constant attention and human adaptability. By afternoon, the frost had begun to thaw, sunlight glinting on metal vehicles, now rolling smoothly once more. The convoy continued toward its destination, mission accomplished, yet the psychological and procedural ripples of the incident persisted. Soldiers spoke quietly among themselves, officers made notes in official records, and civilians resumed their morning routines. The cow, oblivious to its impact, returned to grazing, its role in the machinery of war complete yet indelible. In this way, the aftermath of a brief, unlikely disruption revealed the interconnectedness of human, mechanical, and natural factors in wartime logistics. Minor as it seemed, the event illustrated the vulnerability of occupation forces, the unpredictability of the countryside, and the subtle influence that ordinary civilians, and their animals, could exert on the operations of a modern army. The stage is now set to explore Aftermath Section 2, which will examine broader strategic implications, the German response, and the historical significance of such seemingly trivial interruptions. As the convoy completed its route, German officers reflected on the morning's disruption. Though no lives were lost and no enemy action occurred, the incident was logged as a cautionary example of vulnerability. Military communications emphasized that even routine movements could be compromised by unexpected factors. The brief halt caused minor wear to vehicles, created gaps in formation, and required officers to exercise rapid judgment under unforeseen circumstances. These small inefficiencies, repeated across multiple convoys, could cumulatively affect the broader supply chain, a reality German logistics officers took seriously. The mechanical and tactical lessons were clear. Trucks in convoy required greater spacing to accommodate sudden stops. Drivers were reminded to anticipate irregular obstacles, from weather-related hazards to the unpredictable behavior of livestock. Commanders stressed vigilance even during uneventful stretches of road, acknowledging that a moment's distraction could leave a convoy exposed to ambush or accident. Although a cow seemed a trivial concern, the event became an example in internal reports of how natural and civilian factors could challenge operational control. Beyond military analysis, the event carried psychological implications for both soldiers and civilians. For the soldiers, the pause was a humbling reminder that absolute authority was an illusion. Discipline and training could manage known threats, but the unpredictable world remained a powerful counterforce. For civilians, the incident reinforced a quiet sense of agency. Observing armed soldiers momentarily constrained by an ordinary farm animal offered subtle reassurance. Even under occupation, life could assert itself, and authority was never absolute. This human dimension of minor disruptions helped shape local memory, oral history, and collective understanding of occupation life. Strategically, the event had little effect on the broader war effort, yet it illustrated the fragility of seemingly invulnerable systems. Supply convoys formed the backbone of the German occupation, ensuring that garrisons were equipped, troops were fed, and frontline operations remained uninterrupted. Minor delays, such as those caused by the cow, highlighted the constant negotiation between planning and unpredictability. Logistics officers and military engineers reviewed the incident, updating procedures to include contingencies for unexpected roadblocks. The German army recognized that even the smallest disruption could cascade into operational inefficiencies if ignored, reinforcing the principle that war was as much about managing the mundane as executing grand strategies. The farmer and his livestock, oblivious to these strategic considerations, returned to their routine. Life in the countryside resumed its quiet rhythm, undisturbed by the mechanical and bureaucratic ripples their actions had generated. Yet for the soldiers, the memory endured. The convoy continued to its destination, but the lesson lingered. Military operations, no matter how meticulously planned, were always vulnerable to the smallest interruptions. Historical records from similar incidents emphasize that such minor disruptions were far from isolated. Across occupied Europe, farmers, animals, weather, and the natural environment regularly intersected with military operations, producing delays and occasional accidents. While the cow did not halt the war, it symbolized a universal truth of occupation. Control is provisional, and the living world operates independently of human designs. Minor, unplanned events, animals on the road, a fallen tree, a muddy track, served as reminders of the limitations of authority, the necessity of adaptability, and the persistent unpredictability of life even in wartime. By the evening of that day, the convoy's mission was formally complete. Supplies were delivered, vehicles repaired or adjusted, and officers submitted reports noting both mechanical and human observations. The event became part of the broader record of logistical challenges faced by the German army, cited as a minor but illustrative case of how even the smallest factors could test discipline, technology, and leadership. The cow's role, though accidental, had achieved something rarely documented in military archives. It exposed the delicate balance between human planning and the chaos inherent in the natural world. With the convoy finally dispersed and the roads once again quiet, the scene shifted from immediate operational concerns to reflection on what the incident represented. It was not merely a curiosity, but a lens through which the realities of occupation, the vulnerabilities of military operations, and the influence of ordinary life on extraordinary circumstances could be understood. The story of a single cow interrupting a German convoy, though small in scale, offered insight into the intersection of humanity, machinery, and unpredictability in wartime Europe. In the grand sweep of World War II, the incident of a single cow halting a German convoy might appear inconsequential. Yet it reveals something deeper about the nature of war, the fragility of human control in the face of chance. Battles are recorded in maps, reports, and casualty figures, but the small, unplanned interruptions, the pauses, the obstacles, the everyday intrusions, offer a different perspective. They remind us that war is not only a struggle of armies and machines, but also a negotiation with the unpredictability of life itself. The frost-covered lane in northern France became a microcosm of this reality. Soldiers trained for precision, officers accustomed to discipline, and trucks engineered for efficiency were temporarily rendered vulnerable by something as ordinary as a wandering cow. The event underscored the limits of authority and the unexpected influence of civilians, animals, and nature on military operations. In that brief pause, the ordinary intersected with the extraordinary, creating a moment where human, mechanical, and natural forces collided in ways that no plan could anticipate. Beyond the immediate disruption, the story carries a human truth. It speaks to the resilience of daily life amid the machinery of war, to the subtle agency of civilians and the living world, and to the humility demanded of those who seek total control. Soldiers returned to their duties, supplies reached their destination, and the cow returned to the field, yet the incident lingered in memory and record, a reminder that even the smallest events can carry significance. In a broader sense, the story invites reflection on the balance between order and chaos. It highlights how history is shaped not only by grand strategies and monumental battles, but also by chance encounters, simple acts, and the ordinary rhythms of life that persist even in wartime. The cow, unwittingly, became an agent of disruption and a symbol of unpredictability, a quiet testament to the truth that in war, as in life, no system is immune to the unexpected. It is in these moments, small yet telling, that the human experience of war becomes vivid. A pause in motion, a ripple through a machine, and the enduring reminder that life, messy, stubborn, and unpredictable, never fully yields to control.